Okay, Boomer, listen up. It's time to jump into King's final book of the 1990s. Here are 19 reasons to read Hearts in Atlantis. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Dave Musson, at Dave Musson on Instagram, and this is the place where I'm taking you through all of the works of Stephen King and giving you 19 reasons to read every single book and throwing in some specials here and there too. If that sounds like something you would like more of, then do check out the rest of my channel and maybe consider subscribing too so you don't miss anything in the future. This time we're rounding off 90s King with Hearts in Atlantis, a collection of linked novellas about the 60s, Vietnam, and how one particular generation blew it. I'm going to jump into 19 reasons to read this, and as is the way around here right now and has been for a while, I'm going to cluster all the spoilery reasons together and give you fair warning in case you need to drop out before we get to them. So, buckle up, let's jump into 19 reasons to read Hearts in Atlantis. So there's a lot going on in this book. We've got King being a bit more literary and thoughtful. We've got Dark Tower stuff popping up. We've got the structure itself, a long novella, 3 short stories, and a really short story that's kind of an epilogue, all linked with a few recurring characters. Yep, it's deep, there's a lot going on, and it's really, really good. Unfortunately, Hearts in Atlantis sometimes gets a bit overlooked in the context of all of King's work, and there's probably a couple of reasons for it. This book came out not long after King was out walking and got hit by a minivan in a devastating accident that very nearly killed him, and one of the many consequences of that was that he didn't really do much press for Hearts in Atlantis. The other reason was that the movie of The Green Mile came out at the same time as this book, and a lot of attention was probably pointing that way rather than at this little gem of a book. But it is really underrated, and I definitely recommend you check it out. One of the things I really like about Hearts in Atlantis is how it balances nostalgia with stark realism. Now, we know King is great at nostalgia, particularly the rose-tinted kind, and there is a lot of that in Hearts in Atlantis, but there's also this underlying regret that somehow, somewhere, that generation, that boomer generation, got things wrong. In some ways, this book is kind of unlike anything else King had done before. Sure, he'd done novellas before, collections of novellas like Different Seasons for example, but linked novellas? That was something a bit different. And when you look at the first edition, you can kind of get that sense of confusion, even from his publishers, as to what to put this down as. Rather than saying a novel, a new novel, it just said new fiction. Even they didn't have a clue. I think it's kind of fitting that King rounded off the 90s in much the same way he'd approached the whole decade, by being ambitious, being a bit experimental, and by underlining that he is about so much more than just horror. So let's do a quick mention for each story. First off is the long novella Low Men in Yellow Coats, where we focus on the relationship between 10-year-old Bobby Garfield, is he 10? He might be 11, I can't remember off the top of my head, some kid called Bobby Garfield, and his new upstairs neighbour Ted Brautigan. Now Ted befriends Bobby, employs him to read the paper to him, and tells him to keep an eye out for weird, sinister looking lost pet photos. Turns out that Ted is on the run from these low men in yellow coats, and we get to explore exactly who Ted is and why he is on the run. Alongside that, we meet Bobby's friends Carol and John Sullivan, or Sully John, and we also have the parallel storyline of Bobby's relationship with his mother and how that just becomes particularly difficult. It's drama, it's coming of age, it's a bit weird at times, and it's really, really great. So next is Hearts in Atlantis, set at the University of Maine during the Vietnam War, where students are doing what they can to keep their grades good enough to stop them being drafted. Now unfortunately in this story, a viral game of hearts overtakes the dormitories and people are falling to it left, right and centre, dropping out because they're so obsessed with playing hearts that their grades keep slipping and slipping. Our narrator is Pete, who ends up being saved from the draw of the hearts game by Carol from the previous story. And there's loads of great stuff in here about the anti-war movement, about what it meant to be a young person at this time, and it feels really biographical. It really does line up with King's own personal timeline. There's a load of excellent stuff in this one. Third is Blind Willie, probably the strangest and weakest in the collection. It's about a Vietnam War vet who goes out panhandling every day and goes blind for a few hours while he's out gathering that cash. Now, he has to pay a local beat cop to leave him alone because the cop recognises that something is not quite right with Blind Willie's story, but other than that, he rakes in the cash. Alongside this, he has this strange scrapbook dedicated to Carol from the first story, and it turns out that Blind Willie is somebody who bullied Carol and Bobby and Sully John back in their hometown when they were kids. Every day, Blind Willie writes a letter of apology to Carol, and it all just gets a little bit pretentious and a little bit overthought. But in context, it still kind of works. If it weren't in the middle of this book, it would be a weird one. But as something to take you through this one, it just about scrapes through. So fourth is Why We're in Vietnam, where we pick up with Sully John, who is at a funeral for one of his fellow Vietnam veterans. And we get characters reflecting on how that generation blew it and got lost in the trappings of materialism. Now, there's one scene in particular in this story that is pretty on the nose, but also pretty exceptional. And when you get there, you will probably enjoy it. Last of all is Heavenly Shades of Night Are Falling, where we see a grown-up Bobby back at his hometown and he manages to catch up with Carol, who has changed identities and is on the run from various people. It's pretty much just an epilogue, but it's really beautifully written. Okay, time to enter spoiler territory. If you need to leave here, please do so, and I will see you again very soon. Cheers. Right, let's examine Carol here. Probably the most important story that persists throughout the entire book, and yet given very little agency. She's just this amazing woman that all the male characters absolutely love. Now, much as I like this book, and I really do, I want to see more Carol. I want a Carol story, okay? Okay, now one thing I didn't mention about Carol earlier is one of the reasons she's on the run is that she fell in with some bad folk during the course of her life. One of those bad people she fell in with was a guy called Raymond Fiegler, who has the ability to make himself dim. Someone who can go dim with the initials RF. I spy with my little eye, Randy fucking Flag. So this book is heavy with connections to other King works. Let's start with the Low Men in Yellow Coats and Ted. What's the connection there? Well, those low men are trying to take Ted back to a particular level of the Tower. Yes, Ted is a Dark Tower person and we will meet him again fairly soon. The low men also pop up in a little story called You Are, which is about a freaky pink Kindle, and again, we will come to that one in good time. Ted also occasionally slips into Dark Tower language, which at the same time feels really forced and totally natural in a way that I just cannot explain, but it sort of works. Unless you've not read The Tower, in which case you might well think he's having a stroke. Now, I mentioned materialism in the fourth story and one scene in particular, and now that we're in spoiler zone, I can talk a bit more about that. That scene, that on the nose scene, is where Sully John is actually dying from a heart attack while stuck in traffic, but what he sees is all of these materialistic things dropping from the sky. Pianos, microwaves, lamps, all of this shit that people really don't need that much, and it's dropping from the sky and crushing everyone around him. Like I said, very on point, very on the nose, but it does work really well, and it's an incredibly striking image. So going back to the Low Men in Yellow Coats, it's easy to get distracted by the Bobby-Ted relationship, but actually Bobby's relationship with his mum Liz is just as interesting and beautifully written. It's a very real synopsis of a relationship between a son who is entering adolescence and his mother who is struggling as a single parent to try and keep things going. You see Bobby start to learn about the flaws of his parent, and you see him understand the strains and the stresses of their relationship, and you see them start to come apart. And it's really quite something to read over the course of this page. And it's really quite something to read over the course of this story. As a side note, while we're talking Liz, the scene where she is horrifically raped and beaten by her colleagues is really difficult to read. Really, really difficult. Lastly, Hearts in Atlantis is worth it more than anything because it is so well written. It will make you think, it will make you sad, it will draw you in, and it will keep you hooked. What more do you want? Okay, there we go, 19 reasons to read Hearts in Atlantis, King's final book of the 1990s. Let me know what you think of this one in the comments below, and let me know which of the 5 stories in here is your favourite. If you enjoyed that video and you want more like it, stick around. There's loads more on my channel. 19 reasons to read lots and lots of Stephen King books, and a few specials thrown in as well. If you do enjoy those other videos, maybe consider hitting subscribe so you don't miss any future ones. And if you want to come and say hi on Instagram and chat King with me, I'm at Dave Musson. Always happy to chat to you. So that's it. Another decade of King done. But don't worry, there are still loads more things to talk about. And we're going to do that right here on this channel in the coming weeks and months. In fact, we're just getting started. So I'll see you very soon.